Hi, and thank you for still being with me. Tonight it'll be a short story about a scary highway in the middle of a thick forest, and how a couple almost lost their lives, experiencing unexplained paranormal disturbances. For those who love to drive alone at night, be careful. Some highways can be extremely haunted. No more wasting time. Let's get the story rolling. Have you ever driven down Highway 13 at night? It was a question that drifted through the air in Oakwood, a small town with a big reputation for the supernatural. Nestled in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, Oakwood was an unassuming place, quiet and quaint, with one peculiar claim to fame: the infamous Oakwood Pass on Highway 13. Known by locals as the Highway of Horrors, it had a dark history that spanned centuries. The legend started with the disappearance of the Oakwood settlers in the late 1800s. They vanished without a trace, leaving their belongings, food, and even their livestock behind. Stories of eerie sounds, ghostly apparitions, and mysterious lights in the forest soon followed. As time passed, the tales grew more sinister, and the highway became a magnet for thrill seekers and paranormal enthusiasts. Jake Reynolds had heard all the stories growing up in Oakwood. He was a skeptic by nature, dismissing the ghost tales as mere folklore. That all changed one fateful summer night when he and his best friend Emily decided to take a midnight drive down Highway 13. It was supposed to be a fun, adrenaline-fueled adventure, but it quickly turned into a night they would never forget. The night was moonless, and the highway was shrouded in darkness as Jake's beat-up Jeep rumbled down the winding road. The air was thick with anticipation and a hint of fear. Emily sat in the passenger seat, her eyes scanning the roadside, looking for any sign of the supernatural. They had a camera ready, hoping to capture anything unusual. "Are you sure about this, Jake?" Emily asked, her voice tinged with nervous excitement. "Come on, Em. It's just a road. What's the worst that could happen?" Jake replied with a grin, trying to mask his own trepidation. As they drove deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to close in around them, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The headlights of the Jeep cast eerie shadows on the road ahead. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. They reached a stretch of the highway known as Dead Man's Curve, a sharp bend notorious for fatal accidents. Legend had it that a spectral figure, dubbed the Phantom Hitchhiker, appeared here, causing drivers to swerve off the road. Jake slowed the Jeep, both to navigate the curve safely and to see if they could spot the ghostly figure. "Do you see anything?" Emily asked, her eyes wide with curiosity and fear. "Nothing yet," Jake replied, his voice tense. "But keep your eyes peeled." Just as they rounded the curve, the Jeep's headlights flickered and the engine sputtered. Jake's heart raced as he tried to restart the vehicle. The air grew cold and a dense fog began to roll in, obscuring their view. Panic set in as the engine died completely, leaving them stranded in the middle of the haunted highway. "This can't be happening," Jake muttered, his hands trembling as he turned the key again and again, to no avail. Emily fumbled with her phone, trying to get a signal. "No service," she said, her voice shaking. "What do we do now?" Before Jake could respond, they both heard it. A low, mournful wail that sent chills down their spines. It sounded like a woman crying, the sound echoing through the fog. They exchanged terrified glances, their bravado quickly fading. "Did you hear that?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake nodded, his eyes scanning the fog for any sign of movement. The wailing grew louder, closer, and then they saw her. A figure emerged from the mist, a woman in a tattered white dress, her hair matted, and her face pale. She seemed to float towards them, her eyes empty and hollow. "Start the car, Jake," Emily urged, her voice rising in panic. "I'm trying!" Jake yelled, his hands shaking as he turned the key frantically. The engine roared to life just as the woman reached the side of the Jeep. Her hand slammed against the window, leaving a bloody print. Emily screamed, and Jake floored the accelerator, tearing down the highway. The woman vanished into the fog as quickly as she had appeared, but the sense of dread lingered. They sped down the highway, their hearts pounding, when suddenly the road ahead was blocked by a fallen tree. Jake slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop just inches from the massive trunk. "Great! Now what?" Emily cried, her voice on the verge of hysteria. "We'll have to move it," Jake said, trying to sound braver than he felt. "Stay in the car. I'll see if I can push it aside." He stepped out into the cold night air, his breath visible in the eerie glow of the Jeep's headlights. The fog had lifted slightly, but the oppressive darkness remained. As Jake approached the tree, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned, expecting to see Emily, but there was no one there. "Emily!" he called out, his voice trembling. "Jake, get back in the car!" Emily shouted from inside the Jeep. "There's something out there!" Jake didn't need to be told twice. He rushed back to the vehicle, slamming the door shut, just as a figure appeared at the edge of the headlight's glow. It was a man this time, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, his face twisted in a grotesque expression of anger. He raised a hand, pointing at them accusingly, and then he vanished. "This is insane," Jake muttered, his mind racing. "We need to get out of here." "What about the tree?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Jake looked around, desperate for a solution. Then he remembered the old logging road that branched off Highway 13 a few miles back. It was rarely used and overgrown, but it might be their only chance. "We'll take the logging road," Jake said, starting the Jeep and reversing carefully. "It should loop around and get us back to town." They retraced their path, the oppressive feeling of being watched never leaving them. When they reached the junction, Jake turned onto the narrow, bumpy road. The trees closed in even tighter here, their branches scraping against the sides of the Jeep like fingernails on a chalkboard. The logging road was rough, and progress was slow. The headlights barely penetrated the darkness, casting long, flickering shadows. Every rustle in the underbrush, every snap of a twig made them jump. The sense of unease grew with each passing moment. "Jake, do you see that?" Emily whispered, pointing ahead. A dim light flickered in the distance, swaying gently as if carried by someone. As they drew closer, the light revealed a figure holding a lantern, standing in the middle of the road. It was an old man, his face lined with age and sorrow. He raised the lantern, signaling for them to stop. "Don't stop, Jake," Emily urged. "Just keep going." But something in the man's eyes compelled Jake to slow down. He rolled down the window cautiously. "Are you folks lost?" the old man asked, his voice gravelly but kind. "We're trying to get back to Oakwood," Jake replied. "The main road is blocked." The old man nodded knowingly. "That road's been cursed for generations. You best turn back and take of the old trail through the woods. It's not much better, but it'll get you where you need to go." "Thank you," Jake said, feeling a strange sense of relief. As they drove past the old man, he raised his lantern again, and the light flickered ominously. Emily looked back, but the man had vanished, leaving only the darkness behind. The logging road eventually led them to a narrow trail, barely wide enough for the Jeep. They followed it, the trees closing in even tighter, their branches like skeletal hands reaching out to grab them. The air grew colder, and the oppressive feeling of being watched intensified. "Do you think we'll make it out of here?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have to," Jake replied, trying to sound confident. The trail wound through the forest, twisting and turning, until finally they emerged onto a familiar road. They had made it back to Oakwood. The relief was palpable, but the fear and unease lingered. They drove straight to the local diner, a safe haven in the middle of the night. The bright lights and the comforting smell of coffee and pie were a stark contrast to the horrors they had just experienced. They found a booth and sat down, their hands still shaking. "What the hell just happened out there?" Emily asked, her eyes wide with shock. Jake shook his head. "I don't know. But I'm never driving down Highway 13 again." As they sipped their coffee, an old man sitting at the counter turned to them. "You kids had a run-in with the spirits of Oakwood Pass, didn't you?" Jake and Emily exchanged glances. "How did you know?" Jake asked. The old man chuckled. Everyone in town knows about the highway. It's been haunted ever since the settlers disappeared. Some say their spirits are trapped there, reliving their final moments. Others think it's something darker, an ancient curse that predates the town itself. Do you believe it? Emily asked. The old man nodded solemnly. I've seen enough in my time to know that some things can't be explained. But one thing's for sure. Those who venture down Highway 13 at night rarely come back unchanged. Jake and Emily sat in silence, absorbing the gravity of his words. They had survived their encounter with the haunted highway, but the memories would haunt them for the rest of their lives. As they left the diner and headed home, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the spirits of Oakwood Pass were still with them, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their next victim. And so, the legend of Highway 13 lived on, a chilling reminder of the unseen forces that lurk just beyond the edge of reason, waiting to reach out and pull unsuspecting travelers into the darkness.